My mother and stepfather are going through a very hard time financially. They're essentially about to be homeless. They have nobody to turn to. So this means that I either have to go into CPS, Child Protective Services, or I have to go with my father, my real father, as everybody calls him. Guys, he's never been there for me. And the city is going to force me to live with him because he makes good money. You know, he said he's happy about it, and his wife would be my stepmother, and she's happy too, but I know they're faking it, and I don't know the reason why, but I don't want to go there. Hey, I've been lurking for a while, but I finally decided it's time to share my story. Fair warning, this is going to be long, but I promise it's worth it. I'm still processing everything that's happened, and honestly, I could use some outside perspective on whether I went too far. I'm 16, but this nightmare started when I was 15. My biological father, let's just call him Deadbeat Joe, has been in and out of my life since I was a baby. He's the definition of a deadbeat, barely contacted me unless it was convenient, and fought my mom on child support at every turn. According to him, my mom took his baby away from him when she left, so he punished us both financially out of spite. You know, my mother is basically a saint. She never spoke badly about him to me and actually encouraged our relationship. Even though he rarely made an effort, I did love him as a kid and wanted his attention, but he was always too busy. Usually with whatever questionable women he was dating at the time. I was basically an afterthought to him. I was raised primarily by my mom and my stepfather, who I called Dad because that's what he is to me. You know, they loved me unconditionally and worked incredibly hard to give me a good life. But when I was 12, we had to move to another state for their work. My parents bought a house that turned out to be a total disaster. They basically got scammed. The house had so many issues that were not disclosed to them, and then my mother lost her job. By the time I was 15, things have gotten really bad. We were relying on food banks just to eat, and my parents were on the verge of losing their home. That's when Deadbeat Joe and his new wife, I'll call her Chris, offered to take me in. They claimed they had a stable, comfortable living, and my parents believed them because, well, despite everything, my mom did not think Joe would lie about something that important when it came to my welfare. I didn't want to go. By this point, I'd already developed a pretty strong dislike for Deadbeat, but my parents were desperate. They didn't want me to end up homeless with them, so they reluctantly told me to go, and I agreed to move in with Joe, Chris, and the other children. At first, everything seemed fine. They welcomed me, got me set up in a room, and acted like one big happy family. But that facade cracked pretty quick. Within just a few weeks, the truth came out. They had completely lied about their situation. They were just as broke as my parents, maybe even worse. We lived in a rundown trailer park in a house that constantly had electrical issues. But the poverty wasn't the real issue here. The real problem started when Deadbeat Joe found out I was, well, gay. See, Joe's extremely religious, the kind who thinks that he's completely against what I stand for, and that I need to be cured. He started treating me like I was broken, saying I needed help and that my lifestyle is very sinful. I refused to hide who I really was, which made both him and Chris furious. Chris was a whole other nightmare. She was manipulative, controlling to an extreme degree. She created ridiculous schedules for when we were allowed to do certain activities, refused to let me attend school for weeks at a time with no explanation, and constantly threatened to cut me off from the entire family of mine if I did not do exactly what she said. The stress was starting to become unbearable. I spent most nights crying in my room, sometimes wishing the faulty wiring in the house would just start a fire and end my misery. The mental toll was crushing me, and I was developing serious anxiety and depression. Things escalated dramatically when Chris accused me of looking up, well, very inappropriate photos on her phone. She claimed that somebody had used her phone to search for content that was inappropriate involving, well, let's just say, not so old people. And she immediately decided I was responsible. She called me all sorts of names that started with a P and said that I was a danger to, well, my younger half-brothers. Deadbeat Joe took her side immediately. He took my phone away and on multiple occasions threatened me with knives to try to get me to confess to something I absolutely did not do. In desperation, I managed to grab my phone back one night and ran away, hiding in the bushes outside the trailer park. Someone called the cops, but when they arrived, Chris and Deadbeat Joe completely manipulated the situation. They painted me as some unstable, problematic teenager throwing a tantrum, and the police left without helping me. So, the week that followed was absolute hell. They kept me prisoner in that house, constantly interrogating me, threatening me, and trying to force a confession. I stood my ground, and eventually, after contacting my real parents, I was able to escape and move back in with them. I was absolutely seething with rage by this point, but initially, I tried to just move on with my life. Then, about a month after I left, I kept flashing back to Chris's smug face during that final week. How confident she was that she could destroy my life with her lies and suffer no consequence. And that's when I decided I could not just let it go. They needed to pay for what they did to me. I've already taken some small steps for revenge. I signed Chris up for every single spam list that I could find online using her work email from the school directory. She's a teacher. Everything from Scientology, recruitment, to all sorts of inappropriate sites. I also sent recordings I'd secretly made of her verbal abuse to her family and friends, and I decided not to let my stepfather adopt me legally just yet, because it would mean Deadbeat Joe would stop paying the $1,200 monthly child support he owes my mom. By my calculations, he'll have to pay about $25,000 before I turn 18, but I feel like this isn't enough. These people tried to destroy me. They accused me of being, all sorts of names, threatened me with weapons, imprisoned me, and tormented me for being who I am. Part of me wants to completely ruin their lives with the way they tried to ruin mine. Well, so guys, at this point in the post, I'm gonna need your advice. Have I gone too far already, or have I not gone far enough? What would you do in my situation? I'm still angry, but I'm also scared of letting this hatred consume me. Any suggestions on how to process all this or what my next step should be? Update number 1. Guys, I'm back with an update, and I'm just going to jump straight into it. It's going to be a long one. So, it's been about 3 weeks since my post, and wow! I did not expect things to unfold the way they did. Thank you for the advice and supports. So, remember how I mentioned signing Chris up for spam using her school email? Well, that turned out to be just the beginning of a much larger crap storm that I accidentally set off. After reading your comments, I decided to check if my spam campaign had any visible effect. When I looked up the school directory again, I discovered something shocking. Not just Chris's information, but every teacher's contact info had been scrubbed from the site. At first, I thought maybe the school had just updated their privacy policy or something, but then yesterday I got a call from my cousin who attended the same school where Chris teaches. Apparently, there's been a massive scandal. The websites I signed Chris up for, some of them started sending explicit confirmation email newsletters to her school email. And because the school district uses some shared email system where admins can sometimes see the incoming mail, several of these emails were flagged by the IT department. According to my cousin, Chris was called into the emergency meeting section with the principal and the school's district HR. They confronted her about the inappropriate comments and all the content being sent in, to her work email, and Chris absolutely lost her mind. She starts screaming that she was being set up and this was all my fault. And here's where it gets even better. In her rage-fueled meltdown, she apparently starts saying some very, 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 very bad stuff about me in front of the school officials. She went on a rant about how I was mentally ill for being who I am, and how she and Deadbeat Joe had tried to help me, but I was beyond saving. My cousin said the principal looked absolutely horrified. The school has a strict anti-discrimination policy, and several students in the school are openly LGBTQ+. The principal immediately placed Chris on admin leave, pending an investigation into her conduct. The district is taking very serious matters because teachers are held to a higher standard regarding their views on diversity and inclusion. I never intended for things to go this far, but I can't say I feel bad about it. This woman who messed me up mentally and emotionally, who kept me prisoner in her home and accused me of being all sorts of things that start with the letter P, is now facing serious professional consequences for her bigotry. But here's where I'm starting to get a bit conflicted. Deadbeat Joe called my mother yesterday in a complete panic. He was sobbing about how they might lose their only source of income if Chris gets fired, and how they're already being on rents for their trailer. He actually had the audacity to ask if Mother could talk to me about calling off the attack, as if I have some kind of power to undo magically what's already been set in motion. My mother, being the kind person she is, sounded genuinely concerned when she told me about the call. She doesn't know the full extent of what happened at their house or what I've done in retaliation. Part of me feels like I should come clean to her about everything, but another part knows that she might ask me to stop, and I'm not sure I want to. The recordings I sent to Chris's family have also started causing problems for her. One of her sisters called my mother. They exchanged numbers during my stay and asked if things Chris said in those recordings were true. When my mother did not know what she was talking about, her sister played some of the audio where Chris can be heard calling me disgusting slurs and threatening to beat the you-know-what out of me. Yeah, she actually said it. My mother was absolutely horrified. Now, her entire extended family is in turmoil, with some members defending her and others completely cutting her off. Her parents apparently called her to say they were disappointed in her behavior, which from what I've heard devastated Chris. So here I am, watching the chaos unfold from a distance. Part of me feels powerful for the first time in forever, but another part wonders if this is going to spiral even further out of control. Deadbeat Joe knows I'm behind at least some of this, and I'm a bit worried about what he might do if Chris does end up getting fired. Guys, what do you think? Should I put the brakes on this somehow, or just let it play out? Is there a way to protect myself if Deadbeat Joe decides to retaliate? And how do I handle the fact that my mother is now learning the truth about what happened in that house? Update number 2. It's just been over a month since my last update, and holy crap. Things have escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated. I'm actually in shock at how quickly everything's unraveling for Deadbeat Joe and Chris. So after the school situation blew up, I decided to take some of your advice and focus on documenting everything in case it gets worse. I created a detailed timeline of all the abuse I suffered at their hands, backed up the recordings I had, and made sure my parents had copies of everything. My mother was absolutely devastated when she heard the full recordings of what Chris and Deadbeat Joe had said and done to me. She broke down crying and kept apologizing for letting me go there. What I did not mention is that during the 2 months I lived with him, I noticed some seriously shady stuff about Deadbeat Joe's finances. He was always complaining about having to pay child support, but I saw him splash cash on ridiculous things. A new gaming system, expensive alcohol, even a dirt bike for himself. Well, meanwhile, he claimed he could not afford basic necessities for the household, and it never made sense to me. Well, about 2 weeks ago, my mother got a call from the state's Child Support Enforcement Office. They were conducting an audit of Deadbeat Joe's payment history because of inconsistencies in his reported income. Apparently, they had reason to believe he was hiding money to reduce his child support obligations. I'm not sure what triggered the investigation. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was increasing attention on their family due to the school scandal, or maybe it was something else entirely, but what they found was major. Deadbeat Joe has been working under the table at multiple jobs for years, and hiding the income. He's been claiming poverty to the child support office while actually making decent money, and then hiding it all to avoid paying what he owes. The caseworker told my mom they found evidence that he's been underpaying by about $800 a month for the past 4 years. The state's now pursuing him on the back child support plus interest and penalties. We're talking about like 50 stacks that he owes my mom. And because he deliberately concealed income, there could be criminal charges for fraud. Yesterday, my mother received an initial payment of $5,000 that was seized directly from Deadbeat Joe's bank account that he had not disclosed to the state. Well, she was in absolute complete shock that money is going to help us catch up on our mortgage and maybe even fix some of the problems with our home. So, by the story, it gets even better or worse depending on your perspective. Remember how Chris was put on admin leave for her teaching job? Well, the school board made their decision last week. She's been terminated for violation of the district's ethic and non-discrimination policy. Between the inappropriate emails, which she could not adequately explain, her documented comments about my lifestyle, and, about me to the school. And the recordings that somehow made their way to the principal, I swear that part wasn't me. They determined she was unfit to continue teaching. So now, Deadbeat Joe and Chris have absolutely lost her income, and they're starting to face massive child support debt, possible criminal charges for fraud, and their reputation inside of the community is absolutely tarnished. Multiple family members have cut contact with them, and according to my cousin, they've become pariahs in the neighborhood. Last night, Deadbeat Joe showed up at her house completely drunk as a skunk. He was ranting and raving about how I've ruined his life, how none of this would have happened if I had just admitted what I did. Still clinging to that ridiculous child accusation of the pictures, and how he was going to make me pay. My stepfather had to threaten to call the police before he would leave. We're thinking about getting a restraining order, especially given his history of threatening me with a knife. I'm honestly a bit scared about what he might do in desperation, but also feeling a weird sense of justice. These people tried to break me down completely. They hurt me, imprisoned me, threatened me, tried to force me to deny my identity, and accuse me of one of the worst things you can accuse someone of, and now they're facing the consequences of their actions and choices. But guys, I'm conflicted. My initial revenge plan was petty. Some spam email sharing recordings, making sure he paid the child support he legally owed. I never expected things to go this far. Am I responsible for potentially destroying their lives? Should I feel guilty about this, and how do I handle the fact that Deadbeat Joe might become increasingly desperate and dangerous as things get worse for him? I could use some advice on how to stay safe and process all this. This has gone way beyond what I could have ever imagined. Final updates. It's been 2 long months since my last update, and I think this really will be my final post on the whole saga. The situation with Deadbeat Joe and Chris has reached its conclusion, and I'm finally ready to move on. After Deadbeat Joe showed up drunk as a skunk, we did end up filing a restraining order. The judge granted it immediately, especially after hearing the recordings of him threatening me with a knife and seeing the police report from when I ran away from their house. He's legally not allowed to come within 500 feet of my home or my school or me. But the restraining order turned out to be just the beginning of their legal trouble. Remember how I mentioned the child support fraud investigation? Well, it turns out that was just the tip of the iceberg. Once authorities started digging into Deadbeat Joe's finances, they found evidence of a whole lot more than just hidden income. About 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by a detective who wanted to ask me some questions about what I observed while living with Deadbeat Joe and Chris. Apparently, they were investigating potential tax evasion, welfare fraud, and even identity theft. During my interview, I mentioned something that I had not thought was important before. I noticed Deadbeat Joe had mail and credit card statements coming to the house under different names. The detective seemed very interested in that. A week later, both Deadbeat Joe and Chris were arrested. From what we've been told, they've been running a small-scale identity theft operation, using personal info from some of Chris's former students and their parents to open credit cards and take out massive loans, and they were also claiming benefits they were not entitled to by lying about their household income and composition. The news spread through the community like wildfire. Their mugshots were published in the local paper and on local news websites. Everyone knows exactly who they are and what they did, not just me, but to countless others who their identities were stolen from. But here's the part that I'm still processing during the investigation. The police searched their house and devices, and they found evidence that somebody had caused Chris's phone to search for inappropriate content involving very young people. But it wasn't me. The digital forensics showed that the searches were made when I was verifiably at a doctor's appointment with my mom. The IP address and timing proved it could not have been me. So, the detective didn't tell us who they suspect was responsible because the investigation's ongoing. But reading between the lines, it seems like it might have been Deadbeat Joe himself, and Chris knew it. They tried to frame me for something one of them did. The pure evil of that still makes me sick to my stomach. Both of them are currently sitting in jail, awaiting trial. They could not afford bail. Their other children have been placed with Chris's sister temporarily. Their trailer is being foreclosed on because they have not made payments in months and they've lost absolutely everything. Their jobs, their home, their reputation, their freedom, and even custody of their kids. I should feel vindicated, and in some ways I do. These horrible people who abused me, threatened me, imprisoned me, and tried to frame me for their own crimes are finally facing justice. But I also feel a strange amount of emptiness. I spent so many months consumed by anger and thoughts of revenge, and now that it's all played out, I'm not sure what to do with those feelings. My mother used the child support money to catch up on our mortgage and make some essential repairs to our home. My stepdad found a better job, and our financial situation stabilized, and I'm back in school, getting good grades, and I've even started seeing a therapist to process everything that happened. I'm making progress on my certification in design, which will help me pursue my dream career. I still have nightmares sometimes about being trapped in that trailer with them, about the knife, and about the other accusations, but they're getting less frequent. My therapist says healing is not linear, and I need to be patient with myself. As for further revenge, honestly, there's nothing left for me to do. The system that Deadbeat Joe tried to manipulate for years to avoid supporting me is now coming down on him with full force. Sometimes karma needs a little push to get started, but once she's in motion, she's a hard one to handle. I want to thank everybody who offered advice and support throughout this ordeal. You helped me realize that I wasn't wrong to stand up for myself, but I also think that I needed to focus on my own self for healing rather than being consumed by revenge. I'm not going to waste any more of my life thinking about Deadbeat Joe or Chris. They've taken enough from me already. I'm focused on building my future now, and I have loving parents who support me for who I am. I'm getting the education I deserve. I have the opportunities ahead of me that I never would have had if I stayed in that toxic environment. The best revenge really is living well. And as for Deadbeat Joe and Chris, well, they built their own prison long before they were put in actual cells. A life built on hatred, lies, and cruelty was never going to end well for them. I was just a catalyst that brought it all crashing down.